Today's guest leads marketing and business development at a 120-plus person agency. She transformed the company from a Wix-only partner into a full-stack digital marketing agency.
Technical skills are not the entire part of a job.
But what makes this story interesting isn't just the growth. It's how she leads without micromanaging. It's the trust she builds in a fully remote team. And it's her belief that being a leader is fundamentally different from being a boss.
A lot of hiring managers kind of miss that mark is they ask very baseline questions.
In this episode, we'll talk about what shaped her leadership philosophy, what changed as she scaled from small to 100 employees, and how she protected culture as the agency grew. Kesley, welcome to Agency Culture Conversations.
Very good to be here. Lovely to meet you.
Kesley, the pleasure is all ours. For everyone who's listening, can you tell me a bit about your background and your story? I'd love to know about your education, from starting from university and the journey to where you are now as a director.
Yeah, absolutely. So I got my start going to the University of Texas, San Antonio. I wasn't actually sure what I wanted to study. I originally thought I was going to study English. I've always had a passion for writing, and I think that kind of parlays into the marketing field and the creative aspect, but I also did have that analytical brain. And I knew after going through my freshman year of college that I really wanted to be in the management space. I'm a people person. I love working with people. I love being there for others, whereas it's friends, family members, things like that. I feel I've always had more of kind of a leadership aspect about me, whether that is, again, just in relationships or, or the work I was doing or the clubs I was doing. I always have been a super type A person, very organized, love to plan things, love, spreadsheets and details and everything like that. And so when I really got into university and started going through business classes and realized that there were so many different capacities where I could have both of those creative yet analytical functions. So especially in terms of public relations, communications, and marketing, more business focus. So I started studying both because I loved both aspects. And especially with business, I feel like there are so many different facets to marketing, PR that are all somewhat intertwined with each other. So I really wanted to have a lot of experience in all of these different areas because I did want to have more of a managerial position. Something I've always loved is building something. So building something that I am proud of, building something that I can call something that I directly contributed to. So just to recap on that, in your introduction, while yes, I helped scale the company from just a Wix agency to a full stack digital marketing company with multiple partners, I will leave a lot of that gratitude and execution to our CEO and our leadership team. While yes, I helped on that path, that is definitely something I did not directly run myself. However, something that I did directly own was, building the marketing team and the business development team, but I'll get back to that. So in terms of university and being that I had multiple family members who were in the business space, who were in more the leadership roles. And so I was very much around that a lot. And I was more privileged in a way to understand how those things worked more, growing up and understanding how they worked and seeing family members do it. So when I got into university and I wanted to study both aspects, I knew ultimately that I wanted to get, an advanced degree, study business. However, I knew that whenever I was studying, I needed to have a very stacked resume in order to, present myself, one, to get the master's degree, and two, once I finished the master's degree, to land more of a managerial position. And so I pretty much did anything I could during my undergrad years. I was in multiple clubs, newspaper marketing team, and I did our ad team where we would go and compete. It was like a national advertising competition. And during those, I had multiple jobs. So I worked in sales, I worked in PR, I worked in marketing, I worked in all different kind of capabilities of what I was studying to really get a vast knowledge of where I really wanted to focus on my career path moving forward. And so when I was a junior or senior, I believe, I was working at digital marketing agency, and I loved the aspect of digital marketing because it's changing so quickly. And as someone, I love to be challenged. I love when things change. I love when I kind of don't know what is going to change, what's going to happen. Some people are very, they want to have like a certain set of responsibilities every day. I am pretty much, I love doing something a little bit different every day. And I loved how the digital marketing aspect really encapsulated that, because looking at how much marketing and digital marketing has shifted just even in the last few years is constantly something that you have to really, keep chasing. And it's not something you can really fully master because it changes so much. And I found that super enticing. And so I wanted to go more into that realm. So when I applied for the Master's in Business program, I wanted to do it with more of a management focus, but I was working, the entire time after I finished my undergrad and went into this master's program where it was an accelerated program. So we had classes every single day. We had very full course load, and they actually advised us, if you're working full time, might be time to, take some time off, get the degree done. But I was also in a position where I had a lot of people in my cohort that were a lot older than me and had a lot more experience. And so I wanted to keep my position and really keep working towards that experience while I was getting my degree. And while, yes, that was extremely challenging, I don't regret it at all, because it really taught me how to time manage, how to, work on projects, because the difference between grad school versus undergrad, where people ask me all the time, is in undergrad, yes, you have group projects, but in graduate school, you have a lot more active learning where you're working on actual clients and, you have that actual like real world experience. So I was always, as you could probably tell from my personality, wanting to be team leader, organizing how we did everything, setting up everything. And so I think that really contributed to why I wanted to be in management and why I wanted to build something. So when I was getting my degree, again, it was accelerated. So once I graduated, I was applying to different jobs, and I didn't really know which industry I wanted to be in. I knew I wanted to study, marketing, PR, business development. I was learning a lot during undergrad. In grad school, I always knew I was a people person, but going out, forming relationships and creating business opportunities based on like creativity and looking at someone's pain points, what you can provide as a solution, things like that. So I love the business development aspect of it too. And something that really triggered I really like this opportunity is, again, something to build that I can call my own. So when I got I don't want to call it my first full-time job because I worked full-time prior, but my first full-time job out of grad school, it was leading a business development team for a publishing house. And being that I went into college really loving like, literature and writing and everything like that, I found it to be kind of something exactly that I was looking for. A lot of marketing opportunities, a lot of business development, and building a team surrounding that. And I spent 5 years at that company, and I had wonderful experiences, built a couple imprints directly under that publishing house that are still active, that have, bestsellers under them, and just being able to be very proud of what I built there and learning so many different lessons along the way of, building a team and building not only a trustworthy team, but a high performing team at the same time. And once I was kind of looking for something new, looking for more challenges. I also loved the publishing industry, but I feel like I was so early in my career that I didn't want to be pigeonholed to a certain industry. I wanted to, test my skill sets and things like that. So when I came across the job listing at Zoek, it had a ton of opportunity because, again, when I came on, we were primarily just a Wix partner. And, there were so many different opportunities to build something that I wanted. And there was tons of leadership growth opportunities. And when I was interviewing, there was a ton of buy-in from, the co-founders regarding how I wanted to advance in my career and how I wanted to build something and, giving me the freedom and capability to do that without having to constantly check in with like a private equity firm or whatever to get everything approved. It was more just, I saw something and they're very open to, my feedback, my decisions, not even in my direct department, but in other departments too. If I came in from an outside perspective, looking in, if there was anything I thought could be improved, changed, shifted. And I really like that our culture is built around, yes, everybody runs a department. Everybody's so willing to help each other and everybody is, intertwined with all the different departments and things like that. And so I've been at Zoek for the last 3 years. And like you mentioned, we were primarily a Wix partner agency for web design and marketing. Now we are a full stack digital marketing company. We have a ton of different corporate partnerships. We have a white label division that I pretty much built from scratch, and then built more of our partnership division with our more enterprise level partnerships like Mindbody, like Paychecks, and, our referral programs and things like that. And then also our marketing team where we rebranded, we did a whole new website and everything. And I just had that creative control that I really loved, and being able to take the company from something just in a matter of 3 years, from something that was very, again, not pigeonholed, but like I feel like we only had certain legs to now we've expanded to all these different opportunities, has been something that I can help say I've directly contributed to, and something I'm very proud of. That was a very long-winded answer.
No, it was brilliant. Thank you so much, Kesley, for your wonderful introduction. I think there was so many great points that you had mentioned, and I would love to dive a little bit deeper into Zope later on. But what first caught my attention was your ambition. You sounds like, even early on in college in your career, you always had a very high level of ambition and drive. And I'm curious to know, how do you think that grinding mentality shaped the way you lead your team now? Do you think that is the same expectation that you now have for your teammates?
Few different ways I can answer that, with the short answer being no. I have always been someone who puts 110% into everything that I do. And especially when I'm building something and we're in such a high growth stage or in a new development stage where this is something I'm directly building, where, let's say, for example, I don't have a team yet, but I really want to build proof of concept, because, in any business, you have to show proof of concept before there's direct investment related to it. So especially when building something and when creating all those different opportunities that haven't fully been tested, haven't fully been executed yet, it can have a certain hustle grind culture. And whereas, I've always had that super high level of drive and ambition, even throughout, my collegiate years and going into my graduate degree and everything after, while that is something I directly do, that is not something I expect from my teammates, because in a sense that, yes, I know that this is more of kind of my certain personality type, but also I'm leading by example, but not you follow what I activate, but not directly how I do things, because the team that I have now, they know that I'm constantly, they can reach me at any time and everything like that. However, that is not something I expect nor look for in the team that I'm building. While yes, I think it's important to have the same level of ambition and care for the overall goal, this is something I'm directly overseeing. So especially when you're small and when you're growing and, you have a team that's putting in the work, I am filling in other spots. And that's directly something that I think, well, one is not, it's not a norm in everybody, because that can parlay into burnout and things like that. And I never want to advocate for grind until you're tapped, because I've definitely been in the scenarios where I've overworked myself and while I do have that hustle, that ambition, that grind, I always had felt like I needed to constantly do something else, or I needed to constantly chase. Like if I hit one goal, I needed to hit the next one. And so I think that's more of a level of just like who I am as a person. But managing that expectation of myself and that expectation of my team, because when I have a team who's putting in the work and they have the same level of, drive and passion for the overall goal, I do not expect them to put in the hours that I'm putting in, because, they're doing directly what they need to do, but I'm, filling in other areas where we might not have budget yet, or we might not have the additional team facilitating. So while, we're building and we're showing that proof of concept, I do want to fill in those other areas, but it's definitely not sustainable long-term to be doing all of that every day. Definitely taking time for yourself. Definitely managing, is this something that absolutely needs to be done today, or learning how to delegate, learning how to prioritize. And I understand there are certain especially in marketing, when you go into a marketing job, like marketing people are expected to do so many different, we're content writers, we're graphic designers, we're everything kind of all combined. And so when I'm building both teams, it's while yes, the level of match for the overall vision, the overall goal, and being a self-starter, being self-motivated are key components that I look for. I don't look for someone who work is all they do, because everybody, especially, I think we lose sight of the fact that we're all adults. We're not in school anymore where we have to like ask permission to like use the bathroom and everything. Like we should be able to trust that our team is working when they're not. And I feel like if you've been so restricting and you have people checking, like clocking in, clocking out, tracking every hour of their day, while yes, someone can come in and be initially responsible, I feel like that level of constraint is almost going to have some sort of blowback. So like if you don't trust your team to take an actual sick day versus just like, what does that really say about the culture that you've built if you don't trust your team to have different like sick days versus like paid time off days and things like that? Because if you are, combining the two and you're worried that people are just going to use sick days, while yes, you can't directly control that, but two, the team and, the trust that you've built and the culture that you've presented, while yes, you may have people who take advantage of that, because that's going to happen regardless. But most of the time, if you build, a culture and a leadership model within your team where you respect that they are humans, that they are going to have a life outside of work, and they're going to have personal issues or like things that may be impacting their work, and understanding that restricting them to certain things is not going to create the output that you're wanting. And I think that's very important when you're building a team, is not only looking for that shared vision, that overall goal, and looking for also outside of the technical skill sets of what you're looking for, what are some personality aspects that you're looking for? Is someone a self-starter? Are they collaborative? Are they more of someone who just wants to kind of come in and do a task list and leave, or someone kind of willing to look or create solutions with you? And no one thing is not better than the other, but it's better for certain teams that you manage. So for example, for me, when I'm building a team, I'm not specifically looking for people who just want to come in and do a task list and stick to one, certain task every single day. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's just the nature of one, our business, and the nature of two, being in such like a high growth mode. it's not directly something I look for in, someone's personality or not their technical skill sets, but what are their more work presence skill set, if that makes sense.
Yes, that does make a lot of sense. So, Kesley, it sounds like you hire very self-motivated people like yourself and let them create their own schedules. Is that right?
Yes. So, of course, there are going to be certain things where, like, if you're working from 2 a.m. to like 8 a.m. and then you're off by the time that everybody gets on, obviously that's going to be a little bit tricky. However, if we have meetings set for the week or if there's some sort of issue, being active on Slack, but especially like if you want to start at 7 a.m. and like leave at 3, or you have a day where you are just entirely swamped and you need to leave early to like pick up kids or do drop off or pick up or whatever, that's not something I'm going to restrict. Be like, no, working for me means you can't take care of your family. And that is something that I always take into account, is that level of trust, right? Because if you're getting the work done and you are doing it well, and it's not requiring me to constantly kind of hover or check in on you and things like that, I feel that builds, a trust in itself, to trust the team that you are hiring to do the work that you're hiring them to do. And that comes in part with, being a manager and leading people, is you can't do everything yourself. Trust me, I've tried, and you just can't. And you need to delegate, you need to prioritize, but you also need to trust that you are training your team and giving them resources and giving them access to you for help to do the job that you're hiring them to do. But especially, I have a level of, I always say there are no dumb questions, because I feel like there's certain teams that you hear about either like on LinkedIn or whatever, that are afraid to go to their direct manager for either issues, or they don't understand something, and so they're struggling or they're stressed to complete something when they have no idea what to do. And I want my team to have, the open door policy of, I can come to you if I'm not understanding what you're saying. We can jump on a quick call. We can go over it. Or if we're working on something in like a collaboration with another department, not always having to come directly to me, but like reaching out to the ops person or the salesperson directly and being like, hey, I have this thing. I would love to present it to you. When's a good time? Blah, blah, blah. And especially my team knows, especially how many things I'm managing at once. And they really try to relieve that load and not make sure I'm having to constantly hover, check their work or everything like that, because that is, again, I feel like just a certain level of trust that builds not only a high performing team, but, a team that has the communication skills and that has the collaboration and has the willingness to come to you with issues or the willingness to problem solve. But yeah.
So I'm hearing you, and I hear that you mention you build trust by example and rely on your team to know that they can come to you with issues. I'm curious, can you walk me through what happens when someone isn't delivering? How do you have that conversation with them while still maintaining that trust and, repairing maybe even broken trust in that process?
I think it comes with a certain level of empathy too, and maybe realizing that the reason why they're not performing or the reason why they're not delivering may not even have anything to do with work itself, may be something that's going on in their personal life, or, a family member is sick or whatever the case may be. And I think that in so many workplaces, we forget that, while, it's sometimes taboo, and I don't think it's really any more of the case now, to get to know your teammates on a personal level, like outside of work. But everybody has their own life outside of work. And before you jump to assumptions or conclusions as to why, and associating it with, oh, they're just not doing it or they're not doing this, maybe looking at some of maybe the underlying factors. Do they have something they are struggling with outside of the workplace. Is the workload too much that they just feel like they are underwater? And even though you've made it clear, but you think because of some really toxic workplaces, it's almost like a double-edged sword. You can say, are you underwater? Can I take things off your plate? And they almost think it's like a trap. And so, however, that's not something I do, but I do understand there's like a lot of like, for lack of a better word, like workplace trauma where you can't, or if your manager asks, like, can you take on more work? And you're expected to always just be able to say yes without actually advocating for the fact that you're already doing so much and you really don't have the capacity for more. And so I think it kind of almost retraining and rewiring someone's brain to not think that they're being set up when they're being asked certain questions. And so I think one, it comes with a level of empathy, but if you're asking them, and it's also like a two-way street, if I'm assigning work to you and you're always taking it on and you haven't told me once that it's too much or you're not understanding the concepts or you need more time, how am I going to know? Just like in any sort of relationship, if there's an issue, I expect you to come to me with it, or else how am I going to know there's an issue? And so having one, that open door policy, but two, also navigating the waters of understanding people might be coming from a little bit more of toxic workplaces where they feel like they can't share that information, and advocating and, talking to them like, before it got to this point, why didn't you let me know that you were underwater, or like, that something was going to be delivered late and blah, blah, blah. And I think you just need to have the conversation once, because kind of like with anything, I feel like any sort of baseline communication and comprehension metrics that you put into work or any sort of other relationships are going to be the fact that, like, if you have a conversation with someone about something and after that it's continuous, like, that's a choice after that fact. That, like, the first time can be a mistake and the first time can be a misunderstanding, but if you've had like an open conversation about, that's not how things work here, and in the future, if you're struggling with workload, or if you're struggling with something, if something's going to be late, but like doing it consistently, we might have to look at what is impacting that. How, like, are you prioritizing your time differently? Are you managing your time differently? But also, if you continue after having that conversation and you see also continuous, just like things not being delivered and metrics not being met, at that point, you've had that conversation, you've presented it, and it's continuous, that might have a different level of what to do next. Going in and having more of a managerial perspective, and okay, like, I think the main root cause here is going to be like time management and giving someone the tools to work on those aspects of how to kind of build those technical skills, and giving someone the opportunity to be coached, to be given constructive criticism. Because in anything, when you're working on any project or when you're working in a new team, there's going to be a level of understanding the team dynamic and a learning curve, for lack of a better word, and giving someone the tools to succeed. But again, where it becomes the point if you're constantly having to hover or micromanage, you might have to look at alternatives to, is this person a fit for what you're looking for at an overall basis? Is it the workload? Is it something that I think they're a good high performer in certain areas, but not in other areas? And that can be a level of, is this really something that you want to do? You just don't seem passionate about the work. You don't see, because something that I have always said is that I love what I do. So even though I have days where I'm stacked in meetings and then, working on all my follow-ups and then everything into the evening, I genuinely love what I do. And I know there are going to be aspects of the job not everybody likes, and that's just natural. But if you come into work every day hating everything about your job, then one, it can absolutely be like the leadership structure. And I've definitely, seen that, when talking to people and like, in other terms, it's like they like the work, they don't like the management. Or is it someone who just does not like the field that they're in? And maybe it's something to explore, maybe pivoting to like another department or something like that, and exploring instead of setting them up for failure, maybe uncovering the underlying reasons of why that might be happening. Because I actually haven't had this problem, a couple times. So I've been building teams. I've had a couple people who, this just wasn't the direct thing that they wanted to do. And it just wasn't the right either culture fit or personality fit. And that's okay. That doesn't mean you failed as a leader, because you're not always going to pick the right people 100% of the time. But it's learning, one, how you manage, what your expectations are, what your team's expectations are, what your personality type is, and how they're contributing. And it almost takes kind of hiring and figuring out what that is, especially if you're new to management. Like, you're not going to nail it 100% of the time, but it's learning. And again, taking everything as, what did I learn from this situation? What can I do better next time? What can I look for more in scoping and interviewing?
Excellent. Excellent. I think you mentioned some really great points that really made me curious. So it seems that a lot of the trust that you've built with the team actually happens earlier when you are first hiring them and picking out the right candidate. So I really want to dive deeper into that. And, I'm curious, what are some green or even red flags that you look for when interviewing someone? Like, how do you determine that they will be proactive in reaching out for help and asking the right questions? What are some strategies that you have when interviewing someone?
Yeah. And this is actually, it's something that I've just learned being in management since I was, I think, like 23 years old, is you are going to always have, someone with a great resume who has great qualifications. But again, technical skills are not the entire part of a job. And while, yes, they're very important, like if you're hiring a software engineer and they don't have any software engineering experience, yes, like that can be a problem. However, when you're looking at things, you have to look just beyond the technical skill sets. You have to look at, again, what your expectations are of people, what you're building, what the short-term vision is, what the long-term vision is, and does someone align with that? Again, are they applying to a bunch of different jobs and just kind of seeing what fits or what gives them, the best salary, blah, 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 because you can kind of scope those things pretty early. And I think that is where actually, when I talk to friends or talk to network and they're asking for, job prep and things like that, I do a lot of situational questions, because your resume should cover your technical skills. I should know what you're able to do from your resume. And while, yes, like people can lie on the resume, I believe, inherently people are good and you shouldn't do that. However, you're going to catch that from time to time. And, you might, especially if you're asking more of a situational based question that does pull in the technical skills, what you're hiring for, and seeing how they answer it, and seeing if it's more of like a textbook response or something that they actually really know the things about the technical skills. And I think filtering some of those questions to be very situational, so they can't really like prepare for them. And so I think where a lot of interviewers or hiring managers kind of miss that mark is they ask very baseline questions, because now people expect like, what are your greatest weaknesses and blah, 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 blah. And they know how to answer that question. Asking them something that really makes them think, that really makes them put themselves into a situation, and one, the ability to problem solve, like, because I understand, when you're prepping for an interview, you're prepping for all the scenarios. And especially if you get asked a question that you maybe have to think on, like, we're not timing how fast you can answer it. Like, if you just give me an answer that doesn't even really answer my question, but I know you're just trying to answer and you didn't actually comprehend the question, because that goes back into my thing about communicating is not always comprehending. You can communicate, But if it's not being comprehended, it's not being received, then again, that doesn't really do anything, right? So did they comprehend the question? Are they answering the question in the way that you're asking it? And I would say, like, advice to interviewees, when you get asked a question that really makes you think and you want to think on it for a minute, just say, can you give me a second to gather my thoughts to, we're not going to punish you on or like think differently on how long you take to answer the question. It's more, are you actually answering the question that I'm asking you, or are you giving me an answer that you think I want to hear? And sometimes you can filter that when you hear a very baseline answer and you kind of dig into it a little bit more. You can tell, someone who's really thought through it, someone who really knows like the XYZs, or someone who maybe didn't do like a lot of prior research, or and nerves might be one thing. And I think picking up on those subtle cues if they're super nervous in interviews, and that can always play into it. But I think asking more situational based questions that one involve the technical skills, how they would approach a situation that involves the technical skills, and then also situational questions on how they would approach a problem that also addresses the non-technical skills of like the personality or the communication or collaborative skills that you're looking for. And especially something I see so often where, because when you're interviewing 101 is doing research on the company for their competitors and what's their main product line, or especially if it's like a publicly traded company, all of this information is public information. And then more of the private companies, you have to do a little bit more digging. It's not all going to be available, especially in terms of like, financials, revenue, anything like that. But if I ask a question about who our competitors are, or, if you came into this role, like what would you do to, to help build this, XYZ of what we're doing. And you can tell very, very fast who barely read the job description, who didn't do any company research. And while, yes, I understand, like, we're in a very difficult hiring market, it is up to you. Like, if you want to get the position, if you want to seem serious, like, do your research, do your due diligence, come up with questions. If there's not something accessible, about a company that you really want to learn more on, we love being asked certain questions of like, this is a question I love when people ask me this, because this is like a trick I always give people is, one, how would you measure my success in 90 days? Well, one, if that's listed in the job description, you should come into this and be like, I noted, in the job description, this is how you would measure success. Is that still accurate? Blah, blah, blah. And then be like, this is how I would do it. However, if that's not listed and you're not really sure what would success look like in this position, ask, because you are going to be given, the tools of what we're expecting from you. And, if I'm saying in the first 90 days, I would love if you did X, Y, Z, I would measure success by, I would say this was a standout hire in 90 days if they did X. And a lot of the times we are going to give you exactly what we're looking for. And it's just about, one, being able to answer those questions, doing your research, being prepared for the situational questions, because especially and to interviewers, really asking how someone prefers to work. Like, are they someone who comes in, and again, saying there's no incorrect answer to this. Like, you are going to work in a way that suits you best. But hiring managers, when we're looking for certain personality types, skill sets outside of that technical, we want to know and be truthful, because this is how we're filtering, like, if you might be a good fit for the position or not. And if you don't get a certain position, one, it can be for a number of reasons, but it can just be that, like, you have all the technical skills, you have a standout resume, but, when I'm asking you, are you okay with being challenged every day, having kind of something different to work on every day, being an active problem solver, being an innovator, being a self-motivator, or are you someone who prefers getting a task list and getting, like, graded or blah, blah, blah. And some people love that. That's just not with how fast we move and how many different things I'm managing. That is just not something I do. However, that is not a right or wrong way to manage, because there are people who love that kind of accountability and check-in. Whereas for me, I want someone who's more of a self-starter. If I don't have a task list for you, what have I gone over in our check-ins that I'm like, man, like there are so many different things I'm working on this. I would love, if we could explore these different avenues instead of waiting for me to assign something to you, finding it. Being like, hey, by the way, you mentioned this in our meeting. Here's a couple ideas I had for this. Would you be wanting to discuss them? And I don't expect you, again, to know everything. If I mention one thing, I'm not going to be expecting you to come to me with like a whole game plan. However, instead of waiting for me to assign things and always check in and always be grading you and blah, 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 having more of that self-motivator, self-starter mindset, being able to problem solve, provide solutions, because that's just very much how I move. And I've built a team who's very much the same way. They're like, hey, by the way, I noticed that like you had mentioned XYZ in our check-in. I went ahead and pulled some like, knowledge-based articles or blah, blah. If you like any of these ideas, I can dig into it further, but I just wanted to like double check and see. And like that kind of thing I love, because again, it shows that you're a self-starter, you're self-motivated. And then also working with other teams. If you have someone who, let's say, for example, is very more reserved and they don't like collaborating with like other teams or other departments, while again, that is not a bad thing, it's just maybe not something I'm directly looking for, because especially if you're working on a project for another department, I don't want you to have to filter everything through me. Reach out to the director of that other department, get with them, collaborate with them, sit in on meetings without me having to essentially filter everything and then again provide you with a task list, being that self-motivator and going and, meeting with them and blah, blah, blah.
Great. So you said so many things I want to dive into. So I think when you were talking through that interview process, the preparation is a huge portion of it, but it's also that spontaneity. It's how you think. It's how you can critically solve problems on the spot. So are you able to walk me through one of the, maybe even like your favorite question that you asked one of your interviewees, and how does that particular situational question allow you to dive into the skills that they have?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it kind of changes based on what my short-term and long-term goals are at the time. But let's say if I'm hiring for the partnership division of the team and I'm saying, hey, so if I had a goal to bring on how many different agencies in the next year, and we were seeing that onboarding was a little bit slowed, and we're having really good meetings, but we're meeting with people who more aren't in that space to white label, more be in a referral-based partnership. How would you approach that problem, and what would you recommend to be, kind of steps of action? And again, if they don't know the direct answer, if it's more of a managerial position that I'm hiring for who's going to have a team under them, I would expect them to have a little bit more knowledge on how to approach this. However, if it's someone that I know that they're thinking critically about it and they're asking me questions, they're like, well, what are our metrics here? Or do you have any insight onto like why these aren't converting? Or like, what is the typical like sales pipeline of how long these are taking to go like from meeting to partner, blah, blah, blah. Having those technical based questions are going to flag to me that you're thinking critically about this. You're thinking about what actually goes into how to create an action plan, because especially in marketing and business development, in anything really, there's idea and there's execution. And you can have all the great ideas in the world, but if you don't actually have a plan to execute them, and execution comes from the analytical side of improving those baseline metrics. And so those are some things that I look out for that one involves the technical skills and the critical thinking skills, but also more of how they would approach the situation in a different way and asking those necessary questions. And that also flags to me, you're willing to ask me questions. You're willing to get the information from me instead of just providing me with ideas and then being like, this is great. I think we should do this. I'm like, okay, why? Why do you think we should do this? And to explain to me how you got there. Like, how did you come to that this would be the recommended action plan? And if you push people on certain things of how they got to that space, it's kind of like when you're back in school and they had you like write out your answers to everything. It drove me insane. But again, that's just kind of like seeing if someone understands like the base material and then applying it to the execution plan. Because that can show me, like I mentioned, a number of different things. They're comfortable asking me follow-up questions. They're comfortable with, they know the baseline of what it takes to go from idea to action to execution and success, especially if they're like, well, what are we measuring as level of success? Like, what would it be like the cost per acquisition, the number, the volume, like like understanding those baseline metrics and applying them and either asking me for my feedback, because especially like if you're coming into a team blind, like you're going to need to ask those necessary questions to create recommended strategies. And so if you can't ask me that in the interview, that's going to fly to me as this is someone who's going to try and do everything without asking me, you know, what is actually happening. You can't learn why something is not performing without asking or diving into why it's right.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for that. That was super
Sure.
insightful. And I think to our listeners, that's very helpful for not only hiring managers, but, you know, candidates who are entering these roles on what, you know, a director looks for when they are interviewing. So really appreciate you going into that. I actually want to shift gears and talk a little bit about your daily role. So Kesley, you lead both marketing and partnerships. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. So, you know, I can imagine those are two different teams with two very different functions. So, how do you make sure that both teams are working towards the same mission and have the same goals in mind?
Yeah. So I think this is something I kind of touched on earlier, is being very clear about what your goals are, what your metrics for success are. And because again, kind of like I mentioned before, of if you have a problem, but you're not bringing it to me, how am I supposed to know? Much like if you have certain expectations of your team, but they don't know what you're expecting of them from them, or they don't know the metrics in which success is being graded, then again, how are they supposed to know? They can have a general idea of what you're looking for, but I think being very clear on short-term goals, long-term goals, how you are measuring success in this position, how are you measuring success in growth? And because, while yes, like marketing versus business development partnerships have two very different functions, I think managing the teams has, you know, a foundational piece that remains, is being clear on expectations, how you're measuring success. Because, for example, like when we go into a scoping call where we're providing marketing for, you know, a business, we cannot just provide a marketing package blind without knowing any of their pain points. We need to understand, you know, how their business works, how many employees, like what their, you know, what their current spend is, what their previous issues were. Did they have, you know, what are their metrics for success? What are their pain points that they're focusing on? How would they measure success of hiring you as a marketing agency or partnering with you? Like, what pain points are you solving for them? And I think it has the baseline foundation that remains the same, is understanding the core information about the expectations and how we're measuring success in the role, what the short-term goals are, what the long-term goals are. And some things, yes, are variable, where in the case of building partnerships, like it can be something that you are building towards, but that common goal is there. And you have different action added items that impact how you're moving towards that goal. So I think being very clear on what you would want to have as your short-term goals, what you would want, what you would like to have as your long-term goals, and also being realistic. What are the current metrics and what is actually realistic to achieve? Like, and what's more of a super aggressive goal, like would love to get here, but what's something like this is still performing, but how are we measuring success? What is somewhere we'd like to be? What is, valued as more of aggressive or more, this is something we'd love to reach, but like, again, focusing on those short-term goals that impact the long-term growth and being very clear on like, if those goals change, if priorities shift, making sure your team knows that and making sure your team knows what the shift is and what the new metrics for success are, because knowledge is power. Knowing things about what you're going into in any which case is going to give you the most foundation for setting you up for success.
Yeah, I really love that you mentioned realigning your team once your goals change, because I talk to a lot of founders and that's not always something that I hear being brought up. And it's like a lot of times goals change, the mission changes, but the team is left in the dark. So I really love that you mentioned realigning your team. So, as I'm listening to you talk, one thing that I'm hearing a lot is measuring success. So I'd love to know, how do you measure success? Is it more so input or output? Because I imagine with sales and marketing, there is a huge emphasis on output. Is that also how you measure success in your team?
Yes, and it really depends on what the goal is, right? And I think in both cases, there can be input measured, but especially something that is more action-based, that is more sales focused or results focused. Of course, output is going to be a very key fundamental, like measuring of success, but especially being in the marketing space, we know that marketing takes time and marketing takes testing and strategy and things like that. And so if you're always measuring the success of one initiative based on like a very unrealistic, like 3-month goal, you're almost setting things up to fail. Understanding how things work, understanding those baseline metrics. So if you're, let's say on the marketing side, if you're, if certain things aren't working and you need to kind of realign and test certain initiatives, like that's going to be more input and action and execution focused. Of course, yes, output is important, but like there are so many different variables to output that isn't directly sales based. Like what is, let's say, the cost per lead, the cost per acquisition? Is this testing strategy? Does it have, what are your like success metrics in terms of, let's say if you're starting a social media campaign, and some metrics are great and what I call like vanity metrics, like you're getting a lot of likes, you're getting a lot of shares. You're like, oh, this is kicking off. This is great. But the actual business impact is it hasn't moved. And so that means one, well, yes, like marketing is all about trial and error. Anyone who tells you they know the direct strategy formula to everything, they're wrong, because marketing is trial and error. And you have to be, one, very clear on what is a success metric and what is a vanity metric. Because if you're having something that is hitting a lot of those vanity metrics, but is not actually impacting the overall goal or the business growth goal, then that just means realigning on something. Are we targeting the right audience? Is the content on the right platform? Like, do we have the right messaging, but maybe just, the conversion page isn't there, or like there's something with the landing page or whatever the case may be. And especially on the partnership side, especially like building certain things, of course, success and acquisition of certain things are going to be very, very important, but looking at those, those metrics on the short term as well. What is the cost per acquisition? What is the sales cycle timeline? And once you understand those fundamental components of what makes an input versus an output, it will be very it's going to be a lot easier to go in and refine and identify what a potential problem is than just having like one goal of like, I want to get to X many sales or X many partners by end of however month period. Well, yes, that can be a great overall long-term goal. The short-term goals to get there are actionable and they're input and output based. And I think having the importance of both is very critical to the success of reaching whatever those goals are.
Thank you so much for that insight. I'd love to pivot now and talk more about your team culture and what things you like to do for fun. Can you tell me, I know you grow so much as a company, and how did you keep that culture of freedom and trust intact as you were growing? How did you make sure that as you were bringing in more team members, you were still keeping that culture alive?
Yeah, I think again that's being very upfront about what your expectations are and what you're building and what you're passionate about building, and seeing, if someone is on that same level of they want to do the same thing, they really care about the overall mission and what we're doing. And I think that's goes back into hiring and things like that. But I think also being able to check in with your team and have very candid conversations about, what's working, what's not, and not treating every single thing as a failure, treating it as an opportunity to learn. And I think that gives a little bit more confidence in people to be creative and not kind of have to work in a box or be confined to certain things. Because especially in marketing and business development, like things are so like you can be creative, it's going to have a lot of different variables to it. And I think giving people the opportunity to be creative and test different things and test their skills and text, but like, being clear on if we are not hitting these, foundational metrics, is this something we want to keep putting budget into, or should we shift? Should we try something different? And I think being very upfront about one, the expectations, and two, again, what those metrics are, what those core baselines are, what the short-term goals are, what the long-term goals are. And I think so many things you're saying parlay into so many different like foundational pieces of understanding that everything is there, and you are communicating with your team, you're giving them the tools that they need to succeed, you're meeting them with if needed, if they don't understand something, if you're asking for something that is just wildly unachievable, and then giving them the opportunity to be the expert. Because especially when you're hiring for someone for a certain position, like you want to hire them because they are better at said thing than you are. And giving them the opportunity to say, you know what, like I understand this, however, I think we should shift perspectives and try it like this. Because clearly if something we are doing hasn't been working, like we need some outside perspective. So giving people the opportunity to be creative, to show their expertise, to show their leadership. And I think that creates a culture of trust, and you trust them to bring their expertise, their perspective, but you also trust them to work on something that is so important to you, and giving them the responsibility to work on something that is such a passion point for you and something you're so dedicated to build, and really seeing who takes that and really wants to run with it versus someone who, maybe just isn't quite ready for the challenge. And again, that comes back to, just figuring out again what your expectations are, and what personalities you're looking for, and what technical versus non-technical skills you're looking for in a person. And you're really going to see that shine through when it comes to situations like this.
Wonderful. Kesley, if I'm not mistaken, your team is mostly remote. Is that right?
We're all fully remote. We
Okay.
are headquartered out of California. And it used to be a full in-office team, and then COVID hit and it went fully remote. And so we are North America based. We have a lot of people in the US. We have some people in Canada, some people in Mexico. And I think having one, because remote work is not for every person. I've talked to a lot of people who, will talk to me and say, how do you work remote every day? I would, I just can't do it. I need to go into an office. I think it's again like certain personality types and being more self-motivated and being more of a self-starter. Not saying people who go into an office aren't. It's just it's how you prefer to work. If you work better going into an office and you can't separate yourself from like home versus work, which is like a very big thing that I hear come up. And that's not right or wrong. I'm just, my certain type of working is I can pretty much work from wherever. And as long as I have access to my laptop and access to internet, I can get what I need to get done. But some people are more, they need, in order to be productive, they need to be in a separate place and, from where they like cook, clean, go to bed, and that is very understandable. That's just not something technically how I operate. So especially when I'm hiring people and they know it's a fully remote job, I'm sure to ask, I'm like, have you worked in remote spaces before? How do you prefer to work? And seeing, someone who's more self-motivated, blah, blah, who doesn't, if they're someone who's like, this is my first remote job, I've only ever worked in offices. It's not saying it can't be done, but you have to maybe flag that for, is this person going to thrive as a remote worker, or are they going to struggle a little bit?
Yeah, that's a very good point that you bring up. So I actually am curious, in a team that is fully remote with over 120 plus people, how do you ensure that people are connecting as humans and not just coworkers? And is that something you intentionally plan? Do you plan events and outings and maybe team bondings? Or is that something that you think happens naturally?
I think it's something that more happens naturally, that I try and promote a culture within my team of like sharing kind of like, what's something when I do like team meetings, I'll say like, what was your win of the week, both personal and professional. So making sure not everything is always about work. Like what's like a personal win that you had? It's like, oh, I learned how to, or I sewed my first shirt or whatever. They're like, and learning about like someone's hobbies and things like that can help you like kind of relate to them more, so they're not just thinking like this is just such a job. Like it's actually like having a team that actually cares about like who you are as a person. And then in terms of leadership, we do meetups and things like that. More like we try and meet at least like biannually to get our, leadership team together and focus on, again, our goals for the year, our direct input for the year, like what we're focusing on, have strategies shifted? Are there any corporate initiatives like newer things, services that we're launching that we all like want to get excited about or whatever? And I think having that in person FaceTime, especially like when you are fully remote, is a great opportunity to actually just like feel like you're an actual team. And like you think someone being on Zoom, and it's like the first time you're meeting them like in real life. And I think it's important to have things like that, but not all remote businesses have necessarily the budget to do like team meetups every however long. But making sure there is that culture of that this isn't just a job. Like I genuinely want to know who you are as a person, like what you care about outside of work and things like that. And because, I work in marketing and business development, I do a lot of events, or I go to like, things representing the company. So that's great in that case of getting to know, like, let's say partners I've again worked on primarily over like Google Meet or Zoom, and actually like getting to know them in person and getting, asking about them and like who they are as a person, I think is a way to have that flow naturally.
Yeah, I think what you mentioned is so relatable. When you meet people online and then you meet them in person, I remember this one time I met one of my coworkers. I was like, wow, you're like double tall of what I thought you would look like. And so, yeah, having those in-person moments, I think is very valuable. Yeah, so Kesley, what was the last event that you guys hosted together?
And I will say, just like something people always tell me is I'm taller than they think I would be. It's
Very common.
which is funny. The last company event that we went to was actually it was July or August, but we are partnered with a software company out of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. And me being Canadian, I love being able to go back to Canada. And it's so funny when I travel with either like our CEO or VP of product who either haven't been to Canada before, everything like that. It's almost like cool just being like getting to go back to like, I'm not from Saskatchewan, like I'm from Alberta, but like going back to Canada and kind of like having so many partners and like people who are Canadian, I think is so funny to me because that's again like kind of like part of my roots and like where I grew up and so we're partnered with them and they host like a big kind of like partner advisory council for a lot of more of the longstanding partners and getting to know kind of like all the sales reps on the team you're working on, all the partners from their side and everything like that is great. We're actually doing a meetup with them. They're doing like a road show in Miami and I actually leave on Sunday, which is crazy because I haven't even like registered that yet. But we're my CEO, my CFO, and our VP of product are going to Miami on Sunday. And so that's going to be really exciting. I haven't seen anybody in person since about August. We usually do a Christmas thing, but everybody's schedules were kind of like all over the map this year, and it just kind of like nailing down a date where like mostly everybody could make it was just kind of impossible. But it's going to be really good to see everybody, and because I haven't seen anyone in person since like I think like July or August.
Wow, that's been a very long time. Well, I wish you a very wonderful trip. And this Saturday or Sunday, it's coming up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So unfortunately, we are closing near our time. So Kesley wanted to end with a very strong question. So looking back on your early leadership years, what mistake would you refuse to repeat?
God, which one? I mean, like, something I take as a person is every opportunity is a blessing or a lesson, right? So, if you treat every single thing as a failure, you're going to have you're going to be so hard on yourself. And especially when you are early leadership, early management, like you need to give yourself some grace that you are learning the ropes on how to do things. Of course, like making the same mistakes over and over again, being like, it's fine, I'm new, blah, blah. Like that's one thing, but really taking every situation with what did I learn from the situation? What could I have done better? How were there things that I maybe did not look for that that I look out for now? Because like I said, like you're going to learn how you move and how you want your team to function. And that does come with figuring things out. And again, not repeating same mistakes and really learning from the opportunity that it showed you of where is an area for improvement and where maybe even if let's say you hire someone and they seemed great on paper, but then they go haywire and you were doing everything you could as a leader, what maybe did you not look out for? And like, that now looking back, you're like, that might have been a little bit of a red flag that I maybe just like overlooked or like, just things like that. And I think going into something I would not repeat again and again, like if I make a mistake, I try very hard not to repeat it. I try very hard to learn the lesson from it. But especially I would say going into working environments where you are not sure if it's a culture fit. You're not sure if it's somewhere you want to be, if it's like, if it's like offering, a good salary, but you actually don't like the work. Like when you are looking for a job, and especially me, like I just don't think of my job as something that like I do clock in, clock out every day. Like I genuinely love my job, and everybody who is like in my life knows exactly what I do because I'm so passionate about what I do. And even when I have the really long working days, I love what I do. And I think it's very reflective in how I talk about work and how I, do things. And so when you're looking for a new position, especially where you really want to make an impact and you really want to build something, like making sure not only like when people go into interviews, like, yes, we're interviewing you, you should also be interviewing us. like you should also be asking us questions to make sure if it's a good fit for you. Like, not just, am I qualified for this job? Are you qualified to work with me? Like, it's all interviewing me too. Like, because yes, well, I can ask all these questions and see if you're like a good fit for my team. I may not be a good fit for you, and that's okay. But I think going into those conversations, knowing what you want, and not going somewhere where you don't see it, as something you're excited to do, you're excited because that's just, unfortunately, it's just going to be reflective in your work. And I think that when you are looking for a position where you can really see yourself thriving, like asking all those questions, like what are the end goals? Like where would this company like to be in 5 years? How can I contribute to that? And again, interviewing us just as much as we're interviewing you. And they're luckily all of like the very like long-term jobs that I've had, I haven't necessarily like made this mistake, but definitely when I'm when I'm interviewing, I'll see, I'm just like, man, I don't think would be a good place for me because of how either their mindset towards things or how they're answering my questions, or how if they can't answer my questions, I'm like, because it seems like this is going to be somewhere where I pretty much be flying blind. And so, well, yes, that is something like having some sort of like base metrics to go off of. And again, so I think that something I would not do again is even going through like going through like 8 rounds of interviews for a job you don't really want is like, because while if you're looking for the interview experience, great. Like I'm always saying, like you should at least go on the interview, like at least the first or second, to understand a little bit more and understand more about the company. Because actually when I read the job listing, I was like, I don't really know about this one. But then talking to the CEO, the CFO, their co-founders, hearing their passion, hearing there's so much room for growth, and they're like, their willingness to like buy in me, invest in me, and like my growth in the company and my trajectory was something that really like made it stand out, that I was like, you know what, this is a good fit for me. So I think, when you're interviewing and when you're going into positions, especially where, you're going to be managing a team and you have a lot of expectations of you, like, is it a good fit for you too? And if it's not a fit for you, or off the first like 1 or 2 interviews, if you're just like something is screaming to you, this is not a fit, then don't do it. There are other jobs, there are other, like, you don't have to go into something that is not best benefited for you just because you're looking for a job.
Hello, everyone. This is your guest, Kesley, and this is the Agency Culture Conversations. Thank you so much, Kesley, for being on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.